Thomas dropped a plate, already running toward the back door when the crack of compressed air split the peaceful afternoon. Scout's yelp of pain intertwined with Ethan's first full seizure cry. Through the kitchen window, Thomas saw Patricia Wilcox standing on a garden stool, pellet gun braced against their shared fence, taking aim for a second shot. Her face showed no shock, no remorse, only grim satisfaction. "You were warned about the noise," she called out, not lowering the weapon. Thomas burst into the yard as Scout, despite bleeding from his shoulder, dragged himself to Ethan's side, trying to push his body between the seizing boy and the fence. The dog's blood matted his golden fur, but he remained focused on his duty, whimpering as he licked Ethan's face to prevent him from biting his tongue. Thomas dropped to his knees, cradling his son's jerking body while fumbling for his phone. 911. "My son is having a cluster seizure, and someone just shot his service dog," he shouted, voice cracking as he tried to protect both vulnerable beings with his body. Sophia from next door scaled the fence in her gardening dress, cell phone recording Patricia's attempt to hide the gun. Two more neighbors rushed into the Andersons' yard, one a nurse, immediately attending to Ethan, the other, a former K-9 officer, examining Scout's wound with gentle hands. "Stay with me, buddy," the ex-officer whispered to Scout, whose eyes never left Ethan despite his pain. "You did your job. You're the best boy." Sirens wailed in the distance as Ethan's seizure intensified. Thomas found violation notices appearing with alarming frequency, sometimes twice daily. Excessive irrigation runoff when Scout's water bowl splashed. Unauthorized landscaping when Ethan planted sunflowers in memory of his mother. Noise pollution each time Scout barked his two-bark alert before Ethan's seizures. At night, Thomas researched ADA regulations until his eyes burned, compiling a bulletproof legal defense for Scout's presence while watching Ethan sleep fitfully, the dog curled protectively around the boy's thin frame. The monthly HOA meeting transformed into a battleground when Patricia unveiled her new pet restriction enforcement initiative, complete with PowerPoint slides featuring surveillance photos of Scout and misleading statistics about dog attacks. "That's enough," Thomas finally interrupted, his quiet voice silencing the room. He placed his military service photo beside one of Ethan in the hospital after his accident. "This isn't about property values. This is about my son's life." He played a video showing Scout detecting a seizure 40 seconds before medical instruments could register it, the dog's intervention preventing Ethan from hitting his head during the fall. Several board members dabbed at tears. Patricia's face hardened as she watched her control of the room slipping. "If the board won't uphold our standards," she hissed during closing remarks, "I'll be forced to take matters into my own hands." That night, Ethan experienced 3 seizures in succession, the stress triggering his worst episode in months. As Thomas administered emergency medication with shaking hands, "Good boy," Ethan encouraged, his voice stronger than it had been in months. The seizures hadn't disappeared, but their frequency had diminished dramatically since Scout's return home. The temporary service dog, a gentle Labrador named Beacon, had helped bridge the gap, but nothing replaced the intuitive connection between boy and his original companion. In the courtroom, Patricia's facade finally cracked when confronted with the security camera footage from multiple neighbors' homes, showing her methodical campaign against the Andersons. Her perfectly coiffed hair hung limp as she accepted the plea agreement. 2 years probation, 1,000 hours of community service at the county's Service Animal Training Center, mandatory disability rights education, full restitution for all medical expenses, and a permanent restraining order. "Do you understand the terms of this agreement?" the judge asked severely. "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia whispered, her HOA power suit exchanged for a simple blouse and slacks. "Ms. Wilcox," the judge added, removing her glasses, "I want to be perfectly clear. This court considers service animals to be medical equipment, no less reprehensible than if you had stolen a child's heart medication. Only your lack of prior criminal record keeps you from serving time today." The newly reformed HOA board, with Thomas as co-chair of the newly established Accessibility and Inclusion Committee, passed sweeping bylaw changes. Signs appeared at neighborhood entrances. Service animals welcome in Oakwood Heights. On a crisp October evening, neighbors gathered in the community park for the Scout Courage Award ceremony, establishing an annual scholarship for young people pursuing careers in service animal training or disability advocacy. The golden dog sat regally beside Ethan as the boy delivered a short speech, only occasionally glancing at his notecards. "Scout didn't just save me," Ethan said, his voice quiet but steady. "He saved our community by showing us that following rules matters less than following your heart." Later that night, as Thomas sat on their front porch with a cup of coffee, he noticed a moving truck pulling up across the street. A woman in a wheelchair directed movers carrying boxes, a service dog in a purple vest attentive at her side. Sophia Martinez appeared with a welcome basket. "The Hamiltons read about our neighborhood online," she explained. "They said Oakwood Heights is becoming known as the most accessible community in the county." Thomas watched as Scout, from his vigilant position beside Ethan's bed, raised his head to look out the window at the new service dog. The golden retriever's tail thumped once against the floor, not an alert, but a welcome. Inside Ethan's medical journal, where Thomas had once desperately tracked every seizure and medication adjustment, the last entry simply read, "Today, 0 seizures. Scout. Healing. Us home." The story exploded across national news. HOA is IDENT shoe utilities dies ABLG child CC vice dog. Journalists uncovered Patricia's history, complaints against families with special needs children, harassment of elderly residents with mobility aids, and a previous lawsuit settled quietly when she'd removed an accessibility ramp from a veteran's home. Sophia Martinez organized shifts of neighbors to sit with Ethan and Thomas, bringing home-cooked meals and offering spare bedrooms closer to the hospital. The K-9 officer pulled strings to arrange a special visit. Scout, bandaged and weak but determined, wheeled into Ethan's hospital room on a special gurney. The boy's brain waves stabilized within minutes of Scout's arrival, monitors beeping less frantically as boy and dog reunited. Ethan's pale fingers finding his companion's fur. "I can't afford this," Thomas whispered to the social worker, insurance paperwork swimming before his exhausted eyes. "Either of this." "You don't have to," she said, turning her tablet to show him the crowdfunding page, $157,000 and climbing hourly, with messages of support from across the country. A service dog training center had already offered rehabilitation for Scout and a temporary companion for Ethan. In the courthouse, Patricia sat stone-faced beside her attorney, who attempted to spin a narrative of neighborhood safety and misunderstanding. "My client had no idea this was a service animal." The prosecutor silently placed into evidence 27 emails, 15 certified letters, and 3 video recordings of HOA meetings where Scout status was explicitly discussed. Then she called her star witness, 9-year-old Zoe from across the street, who testified about watching Patricia photograph Scout's service vest hanging on the Andersons' porch railing just days before the shooting. She said it was ugly and against the rules, Zoe stated simply. She said she'd fix the problem soon. 3 days after the shooting, Thomas sat in a hospital conference room surrounded by medical specialists. The neurologist's expression was tight with concern. "Ethan's seizures are proving resistant to our standard protocols," she explained. "His brain activity suggests a trauma response compounding the epilepsy. In these cases, emotional support is as critical as medication." "Scout is his emotional support," Thomas said, voiced raw with exhaustion. "Exactly," the doctor agreed, "which is why we're proposing something unconventional." That afternoon, hospital administrators cleared an unprecedented transfer. Scout, still recovering from surgery but stable, was relocated to a special enclosure within Ethan's hospital room. The veterinary technicians would make rounds alongside the nurses, monitoring both patients simultaneously. "We've never done this before," the hospital director admitted, "but the research on medical service animals is compelling, and your case is exceptional." The media dubbed it Operation Reunion, with camera crews camped outside the hospital. Senators and representatives issued statements about service animal protections and disability rights. Hashtag Justice for Scout trended nationally. In her jail cell, Patricia refused all interview requests, maintaining her position that she was protecting property values. Her attorney's phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment, while her husband quietly filed for divorce, his statement citing irreconcilable differences in our basic humanity. The HOA board convened an emergency session, unanimously voting to dissolve the current leadership structure. We failed our community by enabling behavior that contradicted the very purpose of a homeowners association, to create safe, welcoming neighborhoods, their public statement read. At the veterinary hospital where Scout had initially been treated, donations poured in to establish the Scouts Honor Fund for service animals injured in the line of duty. The veterinarian who had performed Scout surgery appeared on morning shows, educating millions about the medical capabilities of service animals. These aren't pets, she emphasized repeatedly. They're life-saving medical devices with heartbeats. As Thomas kept vigil between his son's bed and Scout's enclosure, he noticed something extraordinary. Each time Ethan's brain activity spiked towards seizure territory on the monitors, Scout, despite his injury, would lift his head and fix his eyes on the boy. And each time, the impending seizure would retreat, like a wave drawing back from shore. Autumn painted Oakwood Heights in amber and gold as Scout, coat now bearing a small patch of silver fur, where the wound had healed, practiced balance exercises in the Andersons' backyard. The service dog moved with deliberate care, his right front leg still not bearing full weight, but his eyes sharp and attentive as Ethan tossed training toys. The moving truck hadn't even pulled away before Patricia Wilcox was measuring the Andersons' mailbox with a tape measure and frowning at Scout, the golden retriever wearing a bright red service vest. Thomas Anderson, a decorated Marine veteran with scars visible and invisible, had chosen Oakwood Heights for its good schools and quiet streets, a fresh start for him and his 14-year-old son, Ethan. What the listing agent hadn't mentioned was Patricia Wilcox, HOA president with 27 years of maintaining neighborhood standards, and a binder of violations thicker than the community bylaws themselves. Dogs over 30 pounds are prohibited, Patricia announced, clipboard already in hand as Scout gently guided Ethan toward their new front door. The boy's fingers were tangled in the dog's fur, a grounding technique his therapist had taught him after the horrific car accident that had claimed his mother's life and left Ethan with traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, and debilitating PTSD. Scout isn't a pet, Thomas explained, maintaining the practiced calm that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. He's a medical necessity. He can detect Ethan's seizures before they happen and helps with his anxiety. Patricia's lips thinned to a bloodless line. We'll see about that. The committee will need to review your paperwork. She said paperwork, the way others might say cockroach. Within days, the Andersons' mailbox was flagged for being midnight blue instead of navy blue, their welcome mat deemed excessive in fiber length, and their garbage cans labeled inappropriately visible from select angles of Mockingbird Lane. As Thomas meticulously renovated their backyard to create a safe haven for Ethan and Scout, following every HOA guideline to the letter, he didn't notice Patricia photographing their property from multiple angles. Nor did he see her watching through parted blinds as Scout alerted to Ethan's first seizure in their new home, barking twice, their warning system, before the boy collapsed on the kitchen floor. The first week of school loomed like a dark cloud on Ethan's horizon. His previous school had been a nightmare of bullying and misunderstanding, teachers untrained in handling his seizures and classmates frightened by his episodes. Thomas had spent hours with Oakwood Heights Middle School's administration, educating them about Scout's role and Ethan's needs. "I just want to be normal, Dad," Ethan whispered the night before classes began, Scout's heavy head resting on his lap as they sat on their new porch swing. "You're not normal, son," Thomas replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're extraordinary. And Scout here is your superhero sidekick." A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face, the expression still rare since losing his mother. The school's principal, Dr. Lifeline, welcomed Scout with unexpected enthusiasm, having arranged a special assembly to introduce the service dog to faculty and students. Kids need to understand differences, she explained to Thomas. Scout isn't just helping Ethan, he's teaching everyone here about compassion and accommodation. That night, Thomas found a formal HOA violation notice taped to their front door. Unauthorized animal on property, $100 daily fine effective immediately. He crumpled the paper, the familiar heat of anger rising in his chest, a feeling he'd worked hard to manage in therapy after his discharge. From the living room came the sound of Ethan's laughter as Scout performed his homework helper routine, picking up dropped pencils and nudging books closer when the boy's hands trembled too much to reach for them. Thomas smoothed out the violation notice and pinned it to their new bulletin board. Below it, he placed his military commendations and Ethan's medical documentation. This wasn't their first battle, and retreat wasn't an option. Across the street, Patricia's living room light glowed late into the night as she scrolled through community bylaws and photographed each car that parked in front of the Andersons' home. In her meticulous logbook, she began a new section labeled simply, Dog Problem. "What kind of person doesn't love dogs?" asked Sofia Martinez, reaching over her fence to offer Scout an organic dog treat as Thomas weeded their new garden beds. Patricia's driven out 3 families in the last year alone. The Johnsons had a son with autism. Patricia complained about his disruptive behaviors until they moved. The rehabilitation for Scout continued through winter, with the specialized veterinary team making weekly house visits. The physical therapist had designed custom exercises that both Ethan and Scout could do together, strengthening the dog's injured shoulder while improving the boy's coordination. "It's symbiotic healing," the therapist explained to Thomas. "They're literally getting better together." On Christmas Eve, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "I cannot undo what I did, but I can learn from it. The enclosed donation to Scout's Honor Fund is the first of many. My community service has shown me that rules without compassion are just another form of cruelty. P.W." Thomas placed the note in the file he'd maintained throughout the ordeal, closing it for the final time before sliding it into his desk drawer. Outside, snow dusted Oakwood Heights in forgiving white as neighbors strung lights along sidewalks designed to accommodate wheelchairs, with braille markers at each crossing. Dr. Levine from Ethan's school visited in January, bringing news that their story had inspired a district-wide educational program about service animals. "We're calling it the Scout Project," she explained, showing Thomas the curriculum that featured photographs of Ethan and Scout demonstrating proper interaction with service animals. "They want to interview you both," she added hesitantly, "but only if Ethan feels ready." Thomas watched his son through the window, throwing snowballs for Scout to catch, an exercise disguised as play, rehabilitation masquerading as joy. The dog moved with increasing confidence, his silver patch catching the winter light. "He's ready," Thomas said. "We all are." When spring returned to Oakwood Heights, it brought new growth in unexpected places. The former Patricia Wilcox, now using her maiden name, had completed half her community service hours and was being mentored by the county's leading service dog trainer. According to Sophia's community grapevine, Patricia had requested additional training beyond her required hours. The community park, once Patricia's showcase of restrictive landscaping, now featured a sensory garden designed for children with autism, wide paths for mobility devices, and a special area for service dogs in training. The sign at its entrance simply read, "All welcome here." Ethan's seizures had stabilized at a manageable frequency, with Scout's alerting abilities returning to pre-injury accuracy. At 16, Ethan had begun speaking at disability advocacy events, Scout steady at his side as he shared their story. "We're not victims," he would tell audiences. "We're change makers." And in the quiet moments between public appearances and medical appointments, when Thomas watched his son and Scout playing in their backyard, now connected by a gate to a community walking path, he recognized something he hadn't felt since before the accident that took his wife: peace.